Hello, everybody. Welcome to AMAZE Live. It's been a little while since we've been here. I'm just checking that this is all working. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Katherine McLaughlin to the broadcast today. Hi, Katherine.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Yes. Is this your first AMAZE Live, or have you, or Facebook Live, or have you done this before?
I have not done this before.
Oh, how exciting. Well,
Yeah.
I know you are a pro, so I am not concerned at all. So welcome. We do these maybe, once or twice a month, depending on, what's happening. And it's such a great way to talk to educators and parents. So just really, really excited to have you here. And we'll talk about more why in just a second.
Yeah.
But, as people are coming to the broadcast, I would just love for you to share a little bit about your background and your history, which is just so interesting, and your path, to becoming a sexuality educator.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. My work really started when I worked for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. I was in New Hampshire. And I first worked in the health center, but then became an educator and a professional trainer. So that's really how it all started. And then people started reaching out around sexuality and disability. And, special educators would reach out, or someone from the Developmental Disability Agency, and saying, we really need help addressing this issue. So I started to provide professional trainings and sexuality education classes. So that's really how that started. And I also did some work with Green Mountain Self-Advocates. So it's a group of people with disabilities in Vermont. And we worked on a project together creating a sexuality education curriculum. And I think what was really those aha moments for me were this assumption that I was going to write the curriculum and create it and be the teacher. And Green Mountain Self-Advocates was like, well, we want to help write it and we want to help teach it. So I was learning a lot about what is self-advocacy as well. And you may have heard this before, nothing about us without us is a saying that many self-advocates use. And so we created this curriculum in 2006, I believe it was. And from then on, I've been doing trainings around it, and I revised it recently. And so that's kind of the main thing is this curriculum. But also doing work around helping other people become sexuality educators for this population too. So I have a 3-day training that I do. And I also have a training that I'm doing in Michigan, which is self-advocates and professional teams teaching the curriculum. So doing lots of work, and it just keeps changing. And yeah.
And how, do you mind sharing like how this became your kind of your specialty, right? Because when you started at Planned Parenthood, I imagine, one of the things I love about Planned Parenthood is way back when I first became a parent, I went to one of the home talks. I don't know if those were things that you did, but there's always a journey with that. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think I think one piece was sort of more personal along the journey as well, cord injury. And so I started using a wheelchair about a year into being an educator. So, now I was part of this community as well. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle for me, and maybe others may have been approached and didn't quite know how to respond. And so I was very interested in the topic personally and professionally. So I think that was a big piece of it.
Yeah. Well, let's get to, you were served as an educational advisor on a video that was kind of first of its kind in the AMAZE collection of videos. It was called Disability and Sexuality. And the response was like tremendous. It was really wonderful to see, so many people, it filling a need for so many people. And, when I was thinking about the video and your work and what it must take to serve in that role of advising, I was thinking, man, how do you distill like the information that you want to share in a 3 to 4 minute video? So I was wondering about, what were the key in your mind when you were working on that project? What were the key concepts that you were like, okay, there are a couple things we really need to get across? Like, what were those things?
Yeah. I would say that there's probably 3 things. One is, people with disabilities want the same thing that other people want as well, and I think just kind of trying to dispel a lot of myths. So I think one of the examples was, seeing the storyboards and seeing the wheelchair had handles on it. And I thought, that sort of implies that he's going to be pushed by somebody. And so little sort of subtle kinds of stereotypes, like people with disabilities are dependent, they need help, that whole thing. And I wanted him to seem more independent too. So in just, removing handles changes people's, perception of people with disabilities. So I have a chair with no handles and people will say, why don't you have it? And I say, because I don't want you to push me around.
Right.
I don't want to give you any ideas, So I think it's very subtle, but that was another point that I wanted to make. And then the last point, I just want to think, is to sort of not be afraid of the word disability. A lot of the terminology that's used is oftentimes euphemisms for disability, like differently abled or physically challenged. And, most people in the disability community don't like those. They don't feel like that fits with them and that it's okay to have a disability and say the word. So those three ideas were kind of the ones I really wanted to get across.
I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad you make that point, because I think that, a lot of times, and I find this also with the gender identity kind of work that we do, that a lot of people are just, they shy away from a conversation because they're worried about making a mistake. And I think that, it's this kind of catch-22 situation, which is really, really challenging. So I'm glad you brought that up. So, there was one, bit of feedback that was a little bit of pushback to the video that I was curious to get your weigh in on. And this viewer wrote, while I applaud your intention, I question your assertion that all people are sexual beings. I have a child who is neurodivergent and asexual, and I know other asexual people as well. I think the language you used could unintentionally lead asexual people to believe something is wrong with them. So I'd be curious about, what your thoughts are. Of course, like, we're all about, an inclusive mindset, but, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think language is a really interesting thing right now. And like you said, it's in some ways making people feel nervous about speaking up or asking a question. So I think that's one piece of it. I also think that we're learning a lot more in the field of sexuality about asexuality. And it was just really helpful for me to just stop. Is the language I'm using in some way impacting others, and like the person said, unintentionally, right? So really trying to be open to like that feedback. But I think what my thoughts are that when I say a sexual being, I don't mean that somebody's having sex. I think of, I usually say someone is a sexual being from birth to death. So that might be a baby being held by their parent and they feel safe and trust and love, and right. So they're a sexual being in that moment as they're developing. It could be someone going through puberty and their body is changing, and be a sexual being that you're developing sexually. Adolescent discovering that they don't have erotic sexual feelings, and that they define themselves as asexual. And maybe they want relationships and maybe they don't, but that it's so, what a sexual being is so different based on where they are in their development. And it's just so different for everybody. So, and this person clearly didn't get that same meaning that I wanted them to get about it, right? So that's not what I meant, but still I could potentially have an impact. So it was I feel like this is how we get better at being educators, is hearing them and then thinking, okay, maybe that's not the right word, because I could unintentionally hurt someone. Maybe it is still the right word, but I need to, say more around it so that people understand what I'm meaning by it. So
no, I agree. It is, and everybody's their lens is going to be a little bit different and shaped by whatever their experience is. So that's going to make a big difference. Yeah.
Totally. And I want to hear that too. I want to hear the other lenses that I might not be thinking about, right? I'm thinking about, okay, we got to make sure people think of people with disabilities as sexual people, right? So let's, but what about people who might not feel sexual or feel asexual? And so on the one hand, trying to dispel a myth and open up people's awareness and potentially accidentally squashing somebody.
Right. Right. Well, I have a few more questions for you, but I just wanted to encourage anybody who's on the broadcast now, or a lot of people come to it later. If you have questions for Katherine or comments or whatever, just share them, drop them in the comments box. And if it's after the broadcast and you're watching this later, we'll wing them to her and try to get those questions answered. So, I would love, we have a lot of parents in this community, obviously, it's AMAZE parents, and the communication is a struggle, and there's a lot of things that people struggle with, whether it's just starting a conversation, whether it's figuring out, terminology, as we've talked about. What are a couple of top tips, or maybe, key things that you see in your work that parents are struggling with, and, your advice for parents to help them kind of level up their communication with their kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are tips that I would give any parent as well. But there was a study done years ago in Australia where they asked adolescents, do you talk to your parents about sexuality? And yes or no? And if they said yes, they asked the adolescents, what is it about your parents that makes you comfortable talking to them? And most of the responses had the word open or openness in their response, but that wasn't even prompted. Like, people didn't say, are your parents open? And they said yes or no. The word just kind of came from them. So I'm always thinking, like, how can you be open? And so that people feel like you're not going to judge them. Your children don't feel judged by you. They feel like you're there for them. You're open. They titled the study "Being Open with Your Mouth Shut." How do you listen and encourage them to think things through themselves and be open to what they're thinking. And the other piece is to not react. I would say respond, don't react. So if a child asks you a question, that you don't assume that means anything. You just answer factually, or where did you hear that? Or, kind of keep the conversation going rather than stopping the conversation.
I think that is, yeah, I think that's, I just want to, pause and just say that's such a great tip, because one thing I actually learned from, I think it's hard for parents not to fill the space. Like, that's kind of what we do. We just kind of okay. And then if we're nervous, we keep talking, right? But one thing that really struck me, I learned from, I don't know if you know Brad Troger, but he's another educator and he's an advisor on some AMAZE content as well. And I heard him say something like, listen, if your kids ask about something, here's a great example, porn. If they ask about it, it doesn't mean they're necessarily doing it or consuming it. They're just curious. And, that's a real crucial distinction, I think, in order for parents to remain open, is to remember, okay, even if they're asking about it, it could just be pure curiosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. What about talking to young kids? So we launched, I'm not sure if you're aware, but a series of video resources for parents of kids ages 4 to 9. And it's been awesome. And then also we have gotten pushback, kind of along the vein of, oh, I just want my kid to be a kid, or, why do I have to use real body part names? This is ridiculous. And I think it's a lot of people's own sort of upbringing and shame around all this stuff. But, what would you advise parents, of young kids who are feeling like, we don't need to do this? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would probably say, even from my own experience of my kids asking me questions, and I had that same sort of reaction, okay, if I answer this, their innocence is shattered. It's over, their childhood is over. And then I answered the question just matter-of-factly, and, my son went, oh, okay, and off he went, and it was really me that was struggling with this content and not him, and that it will not harm him in any way to have information, but we kind of think in some way it's going to harm them. And, as parents, we don't want our kids to grow up anyway, right? So we respond to them being young. And this comes up a lot for people with disabilities. in parenting, parents of kids with disabilities sometimes see their child as a child even when they're older because of the disability. And so, I think it's understandable that parents feel that way, but it will not harm. And if anything, it protects young people from, sexual abuse. I think it makes young people seem more powerful. And with this population, there's a high rate of sexual abuse. So
Yes.
if someone says, "Don't touch my penis," that is going to be stronger than, "No, don't do that." Like, it shows some education. It shows that parents have been talking to them, that they know things, that they're not as vulnerable when they know things. So I just think, you're not going to get into all the nitty ditty, details, gritty details, but just, body parts, privacy, body image, reproduction are all topics that 4 to 9-year-olds can handle. And if they're asking the question, they're ready, they're ready for the answer.
Right. So looping back, you mentioned that it was interesting to me when you said that parents of kids with disabilities, there is that sort of feeling like you want to protect. They feel perhaps in your mind like even more young, or you just want to protect them, which is understandable. So would you say in that case, part of what a parent can do is kind of adjust their mindset from kind of like, oh, I need to protect, my kid from this information, to this information will help them protect themselves? Do you feel like that's like the tweak that people need to make?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Right. So the worry is, if I talk about this, something bad will happen.
Yes.
Rather than, if I talk about this, it will help them protect themselves. I'm not going to be here forever. How do I teach them about speaking up? And this population too is, often taught to comply, not necessarily with parents, but maybe support staff or something. You're supposed to do what you're supposed to do, and so you go along with things. And the work I'm doing right now, teaching people with developmental disabilities, is a lot of it's around speaking up and saying, "This is my body, and I get to decide what's right for me," because they're not used to that. And I put a little pressure on, and I say, "I'll give you $10 if you move your name tag over to this side." And oftentimes they start to move it, and then saying, "It's okay to say no to me, even though I'm the teacher." And so I think a lot of those sorts of lessons. Sorry, my
oh, that's okay.
doing that.
You're very popular. No, I think that's a great point, and that's I think it sounds like a very specific thing that really needs to be worked on, in that particular community, but also just for kids in general. That whole speaking up, is so crucial, and is something that I know I work on with my children too.
Yeah.
Well, so just to close out, at first I was going to ask you about general sex ed recommendations, like resources, your favorite things, which is fine. You could do that, but given the line, your work and your expertise, I don't know if you have specific, children's books or other kinds of resources that you really recommend, in the lane of, disabilities and sexuality, or if not, then general resources is fine. I always love hearing from educators what resources they love.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I have to toot my horn a little. I do love my curriculum. And
yes.
I also have 2 online courses, one for staff people that work with people with developmental disabilities. So how do you talk one-on-one? And then a parent online course as well on how to talk with kids with disabilities. So I think those are useful. And then as far as other resources, I like to use stories about people with disabilities and their relationships. Just because I think it just changes our perception and our stereotypes. And the 2 that I've been using lately, one is called Interabled Love, and it's a young man with a disability, a physical disability, and his partner is a female who's able-bodied. And the stereotype, when they're together and they feel like they're partners and all that, people assume she's his nurse or, his sister, sort of those things. So it just makes us more aware of how we stereotype people. So I like using that one. And also just broadens our idea about what a relationship, not everybody with a disability has a relationship with someone with a disability, and broadens you. And then the other one is a CNN love story. They have great love stories, the CNN, it's Facebook. And there's one called Down for Love, and it's two people with Down syndrome that are in a relationship. And it interviews them, and it shows their relationship, and the parents, both parents talk about the relationship, and a professional who works with the young man talks about their relationship. And I just think it gives us, I think sometimes, especially if we're sexuality educators and not in the field of disability, just gives us more awareness about disability culture. And, a lot of people say that have said to me that when people adapt things for disability, sometimes the piece that's missing is that disability awareness. Similar to, like, the AMAZE sex and disability or sexuality and disability video, that it's often missing some of that community, the disability community, some of those nuances. And so I think those are really useful tools for people, just to see, and even for a parent to see a child with Down syndrome with another child with Down syndrome in a relationship and think, wow, I was thinking this wasn't going to be possible. And look at this, it could actually be possible.
Oh yeah, how wonderful! That I will dig up links, and I'll share all of those things, including your programs, in the comments after the broadcast. And I also wanted to tell you that we've got Sarah watching in Western North Carolina. We have Angie in the Philippines. So there are people tuning in around the world, which is so cool. So, this has been, do you have any parting thoughts before I know we need to let you go, but this has been just such a delight to talk to you today, Katherine.
You too. No, I think, just that sort of we're all in this together. None of us are really that good at this. From the US, I don't know about the Philippines, but, that having a child with a disability, sometimes it's just being a parent that is what's hard about it. And I often say, I've been in the field for 25 years, and I don't have the greatest conversations with my own children sometimes, It's a difficult topic to talk about. And I do remember bringing my son a book, and he threw it across the room and said, I'm not doing this, So, like, we're all doing the best we can, and to just try to stay positive and notice, some of our negative messages that we give our kids. And I'm always thinking, like, what's the message I want to give here about this topic? If it's pornography, if it's, and share your values too. That's what our job is as a parent.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, this was so lovely. Thank you so much for joining us and for giving of yourself and your time and your professional expertise, and really the rally cry for parents that, I think forgiveness and just be kind to yourself. We're all just wading through it. So.
Right.
And for other folks joining later, again, if you have questions for Katherine, please drop them in the comments, and I'll get them to her, and we'll get those questions answered. And meanwhile, we will be back in a couple weeks for a conversation about pornography. So you'll want to tune in to that. Oh, yes. All right. Thank you, Katherine. Take care, everybody.
Take care.